want you to cheer real loud, and we're just going to disrupt the room next door, and I'll just get yelled at later. So if this applies to you, I just want you to clap and scream. So you might be a cyclist if you get withdrawals if you're off your bike for more than a day. Does that apply to you? All right. You might be a cyclist if you're so polite to everyone, but as soon as a grandma in an SUV cuts you off, you curse like a sailor. You might be a cyclist if you know the location of every pothole from home to work. You know you're a cyclist if your bike has a name. All right. You know you're a cyclist if you can't make it to work at 8:30 in the morning, but let someone have a bike ride at 6 o'clock in the morning, you were there early. All right, so we're talking about bike culture. We have our little norms within our bike culture. And so last night I met some of the fabulous women from We Bike New York, NYC. Where are you guys at? I know you're in here somewhere. Okay, they're not in here. And so one of them, mentioned to me that, they really don't see any women cycling in New York. I was talking about black women bike. They're like, hey, we're not even there with black women. We're just trying to get women on bikes. And so it really brings to head that depending on where you're located geographically, we have different challenges and we have different subcultures within biking. Even here at this Women Bike Conference today, this is on the forum, I don't know what it's called, the forum, each of us represent different subgroups. And specifically, in DC, we are registered at least. We have about 27% cyclists that are women, but for black women, we're not even numbered. No one knows how many we have. And so it's really important for us to try to get women of color, black women, Latino women, biking. And so we still have a lot of work to do, and that's why we're here at this forum, and that's why we're all excited, right? All right, I'm gonna kick you guys out if you guys are not warm. But here we're gonna be talking about bike culture, and there are different subcultures. A lot of times we try to, make women this monolithic group, but we're not. Some of us are mothers biking with kids, some are grandmothers. We have the LGBTQ community. I had an opportunity to meet Fender Bender out of Detroit. They're doing fabulous work up there with that community. And we have just women of color and low-income women, medium-income women, women who are cycling for touring, women who are cycling for transportation. And so today we're going to have a conversation of how do we begin to get underrepresented groups on bikes? And how do we really begin to appeal to the broader community of women? And so we have some really great speakers today. So I'm going to start off with Jenna Burton. She's the founder of Red Bike and Green, a bike collective that empowers and engages black cyclists in Oakland, California community. RGB has blossomed. Did I say it right? Okay, I did. RBG has blossomed with chapters springing up in other major cities like Chicago. Anyone from Chicago? Oh, you guys don't have to be from Chicago. All right. Atlanta, and she's a native of Hartford, Connecticut. So as I'm pulling up her presentation, she's going to just give a brief intro of how she got into bike advocacy. Hello, can everybody hear me? Yeah. So I'm, as Veronica mentioned, I'm from the East Coast, so I really didn't get into bike riding until I graduated from college. I went to school out here in Washington, D.C., Howard University in the house. And I relocated to the Bay Area and fell in love with the bike culture. I was a little intimidated at first because it was pretty intense, but I really liked the idea around just creating a lifestyle around riding your bike. And I really wanted to be a part of it, so by the time I actually got up the nerve to purchase my first bike as a resident of Oakland, California, I was hooked. I couldn't stop riding my bike. I was like, this is great for my physical health. I'm a broke, recent college grad working for a nonprofit, so this is a way to save on transportation costs, and it's great for the environment. And from that point on, I was just like, I want to see other people like myself on the street riding bikes and being just as excited as I am. And so it kind of took off from there. Great. So we're going to give her a big round of applause while she comes up to give her presentation.
Thank you. So like I said, I wanted to see more Black people more people that look like myself, getting excited about bike riding. I wanted to see Black people getting excited about it the way that I was. So the first thing that I did was look for an organization or a group that I could ride with. Because it's fun riding with a group of Black people. Like, how often do you see that? And so that group didn't exist, and so that's why I started one, and that's basically where Red Bike and Green came from. We're a collective of Black urban cyclists seeking to improve the physical, economic, and environmental health of African Americans by creating a relevant and sustainable Black bike culture. So I started it in Oakland back in 2008, and it's turned into an organization for African Americans that we carry with us this element of Black history, and you'll notice in the mission we're talking about more than just bike riding. We're talking about community health, we're talking about sustainability, we're talking about the economic conditions, the environmental conditions. And so our mission is actually expanded into what we call a 3-point plan. And so it parallels the same 10-point plan that the Black Panthers came up with, which coincidentally was founded in Oakland, California as well. And you know, the second element of history is you can see it in our aesthetic and our logo and the colors that we wear, which are red, black, and green, and that's kind of how we found inspiration for the title of the organization. So what we basically do is community bike rides. And the purpose of the community bike rides is to just create space for African Americans to come together and enjoy each other's presence and just ride bikes together. I mean, we go on 2 to 3 hour bike rides at a super casual pace. It's intergenerational. It's for families. It's for young people. It's for elders, and we are establishing a presence not only in the Oakland community, but among the African American population within the Oakland community. So we're creating visibility that Black people do ride bikes. So we're presenting an image of what bike riding can look like within the Black community. The more you see it, the more it becomes more commonplace, and the less intimidating it feels. So the community bike rides, they serve a number of purposes. It makes it more or less intimidating for the people that are actually on the bike rides, because they start to get used to it, right? Like, we have some of our cyclists that will come on a bike ride for the first time, in their lives, or the first time ever since they were 9 years old, or learned how to ride a bike 3 months ago. And after that first bike ride, it becomes easier and easier for them to form their own lifestyle around the element of bike riding. And Oakland is a part of a larger metropolitan area that's rapidly changing economically. We're changing in what we look like, the people that live there, the people that don't live there. And these bike rides are a social response to the way that those communities are changing. And so just that visibility, it's a reminder that this is also a space for African Americans that have been living there for generations. A lot of people say that bike lanes are the first signs of gentrification in a community. And so by using those bike lanes and by taking up that much space, it's a reminder that these bike lanes are for us as well. So it's a great way. I really love the bike and the simplicity of it. It's a great way of engaging the community. We're able to have these conversations about more than just bike riding and how beneficial it is. We're able to have conversations and be more conscious of our health and of the environment, and just talking about all of the benefits of bike riding. So the great thing about what we've been doing over the past few years is that we've been establishing a culture around bike riding. So, I mean, we talk a lot about wanting to diversify the bike movement and diversifying cyclists and the industry, but you know, the change also needs to happen from within the communities themselves, especially within these disadvantaged and underrepresented communities. So one of our favorite sayings is that it's bigger than bikes, right? We're using bike riding as a tool for community development. So I mean, we have this aesthetic where we're using the colors and the history and the style that is unique and is well received within the Black community. I mean, you'll see flyers about Black August that, you know, once again is an homage to Black history, and you'll see like the Black power fists in some of our images, and it becomes, as it becomes a part of the culture, then you'll start to see more Black people just getting excited about bikes for reasons that you don't think about right away. So as Veronica mentioned, we now have chapters in Chicago and in Atlanta. We started in Oakland, and we've expanded our programming a little bit to create newer aesthetics around Oakland. So we've partnered with the artist community. We do art exhibitions, and we have all of these community events that aren't just about bike riding, in order to find newer ways of engaging the community around the health benefits of bike riding. Chicago and Atlanta, they also take their own approaches to introducing bike riding to the African American communities in their cities. For example, Chicago, our founder out there is teaching a bicycle mechanics class. And she's really involved in the youth out there, and just a part of, I'm sorry, she really does a good job of bridging the gap among within the diversity of the African American community. So the community in Chicago is really diverse in terms of class and educational background and age. And so what she does is that she brings all of those cyclists together on a single bike ride, and you know, that's what makes it really necessary and unique for Chicago. And in Atlanta, you know, they are doing a really good job of supporting the local Black economy by sending their ridership towards the Black-owned businesses. So these are just some of the examples of the way we've been able to not only diversify the cycling movement, but also to engage the community around the benefits of bike riding. And there's how you can find us.
So we're going to move on to Megan Odette now. She is the founder and organizer of the Washington, D.C. chapter of Kittical Mass, the national movement to encourage legal, safe, and fun cycling with kids. Kids at heart and their families. How many people in here have kids and cycle with their kids? All right. So she's going to be talking to you all. When she's not riding her cargo bike around Washington, D.C. with her 2-year-old son, she works as a fundraiser and database administrator for a national environmental nonprofit. And she's going to talk about how she got into bike advocacy.
Hey, everybody. Thank you for raising your hands, all 5 people who have kids in this room. I'm going to start by sharing my personal biking story because my personal biking story is also sort of my bike advocacy story. Hold on one second. Okay. Always need to move the microphone down. So I've been a cyclist for a long time, and before I got married and had a child, this was kind of my life. I was in great shape. I went out to brunch in DuPont Circle with my friends, and I had a dog, and I rode my bike around DC anytime, night or day, often with the dog. In fact, we even rode down the Mount Vernon Trail to Old Town Alexandria. Yeah. So he was kind of my first baby and my first experience biking with passengers. I put this picture in here because it was taken about a month before I met my husband, which is when everything went horribly wrong. I'm so glad he's not in this room to hear me say that. So on the next slide, that happened. 2 years after that picture was taken, 2 years after that picture was taken, I was married and pregnant, and it turned out to be horrible. Every single day, it was like something new and terrible was happening to my body. And so I had to cut back on everything. I basically ate and dragged myself to work and slept for 7.5 months. And then at the end of 7.5 months, I got even sicker. It turned out that I contracted a very serious pregnancy complication. I went to my doctor and I said, I think I have a sinus infection. And they took my blood pressure and a couple other tests and said, you need to go to the hospital right now. And I'm texting my husband on the way to the hospital, and he's like, do you want me to come to the hospital? And I'm like, I don't know. Do you have a lot of work to do this afternoon? They might keep me over, maybe they'll give me an IV, I don't know. And the doctor ran some more tests and said, you're in trouble, your organs are shutting down, and we're gonna have a baby right now. Yeah, so 6 weeks before my due date, that's him in the NICU. He was in the NICU for 2.5 weeks. Yeah, he's great now, by the way. Thank God for modern medical technology. But there I was, having been very seriously ill, having had an emergency C-section and taking care of a premature baby, in a country with very few maternity leave laws or other protections for working mothers. So I basically lost everything that had been important to me before I got pregnant and had my child. And it took me a long time to heal from that experience emotionally and physically. And I thought I just lost everything I liked about the person I used to be. One day, I decided, screw this, I'm gonna get back one thing about the old me. Yeah. So I did that. That's his very first bike ride, 7 months old. For me, it was such a liberating experience, and there are still so many things that I used to do before I had a baby that I don't do now, that are like stuffed in closets, and we just bring them from apartment to apartment, and I never do anything with them. But I bike. I bike with my son. And it was so important for me to have that freedom back and that ability to just go anywhere, include my son in this thing that had been so important in my life before I had him. So I started looking for ways to connect with other parents in DC, and I had seen more and more people biking with their kids in Washington, DC, but I hadn't seen any kind of movement or network that had brought them together. So I just kind of started talking to people and said, hey, there's this thing called critical mass that I know they do in other cities. Does anybody do it in DC? And I went to WABA about it, and WABA said, sounds like a great idea, have fun. So I just talked to a couple of bike shops, put the word out to a couple of bike blogs, and had like a little party, and started the first critical mass ride in April of 2011. Woo. Yeah, there's us in front of the White House. So that was great. and I did one full, what I call a season of rides, so monthly or almost monthly rides, April to October. It was great. I had as many as 40 people showing up. I had, had one parent come out who was basically looking for something to do with his daughters on Saturday mornings when his wife was out of town. And then the earthquake back in August of 2011, I think, happened. And he happened to have been biking with his daughters to work that day, and he saw how terrible the traffic was getting in and out of DC, and these horror stories, people being stuck in their parking garages for an hour, not even being able to get out of their parking garages. And that really cemented him on the idea of biking with his children. And I really love hearing stories about that, and I wanted to help facilitate more stories about that. And one of the barriers that I came up against when I was looking into ways to bike with my son was that the equipment is really hard to get. It's not stocked in bike shops. You've got to special order it, and you can't try it before you drop like $200 on a bike seat or $1,300 on a long tail. So I wanted to find a way to make it easier for people to learn about all these different things and see them all in one place before, dropping X hundreds of dollars on something that your kid might end up hating. So in spring of 2012, I organized, along with the Department of Transportation Safe Routes to School program and WABA, something that we call the ABCs of Family Biking. And that was an event that we held to help parents learn about what we call the tools and equipment to help them bike with their children. So we brought in parents who biked with their kids, and they just sort of rolled up in their bikes with their trailers and just kind of stood there and talked to parents. WABA did a bike rodeo. They helped teach a new class on how to form a bike train to help your kids bike to school. And a couple of bike shops came and just brought the stuff that they sell so that people would have like a one-stop shop to just see all the different ways that they could bike with their kids and hopefully learn a little bit more about what might or might not work for them before they had to invest a lot of time and money into equipment. Then I started going to these women's biking events because the whole time I was working on critical mass, this question of how to get more women on bikes started percolating up in the bike world. And so I went to a couple of them, and I would hear people talk about like helmet hair, and wearing skirts, and whether it's safe and that sort of thing. And finally, it was at a WABA forum, and I waited till the very end, and then I put my hand up, and then I pretty much leaped out of my seat and tackled Nellie Pearson, yanked the microphone away from her, and said, "So how many people in this room have kids?" And about 5 people raised their hands. And I said, "Well, how many of you," 5 women, how many of you would have liked to bike at some time and didn't because you had kids? 5 people raised their hands. And so it really became important to me to raise this issue of the women's bicycling movement and make sure that it didn't get lost. Because I think you need to be aware that when you're making seats at the table, you need to be thinking about who's not there because they can't be there. And for moms, we're not coming to women's biking events because we're at PTA meetings or we're cleaning up after supper. So when I got this incredibly flattering opportunity to come and speak here, I wanted to make sure that I wasn't just representing my personal, what it's like to bike with kids, and I shall tell you everything about my life biking with kids, and you can then universalize it to everybody in the country. I mean, I do that by accident, so I wanted to make sure not to do it. So I sent out what I called the Family Biking Survey as a way of checking my assumptions as a mom who bikes with her kids. And I thought I would get 20 responses and be able to sort of fine-tune what I was going to say today. And it ended up being this huge groundswell of response from 4 countries and 21 states. I haven't counted the cities yet.